On today's Retro Tech Repair, we're going to be trying to retro-bright some 8-bit macros using daylight on the shortest day of the year, and in the north of England. Hello and welcome to Retro Tech Repair. Just in case you haven't heard of retrobrighting, it's the retro community's name for the application of hydrogen peroxide to yellowed plastics and then the exposure of that to heat or daylight or some other source of light in order to restore its original non-yellowed colour. Now this is a very common technique and you've probably seen it done before, but it's often done in places or on days that are hot and sunny, or using sources of heat like a sous vide, or using lots of ultraviolet lights. But what do you do if you don't have any of these things and you don't live in Texas and it's December? Let's find out if we can brighten the plastics using natural daylight during the winter solstice in North Yorkshire. So I've removed the keyboard now from the Dragon 32 because we're going to start with that, and I'm just going to pop the TRS-80 away for a moment. We'll come back to that in just a second. So I don't need to do anything with the keyboard on the Dragon because it is largely black keys, white printing, but that really hasn't discoloured too much. So really it's just the enclosure on this. But I'm going to start out by giving it a good clean and getting these labels off of, there goes one coming up already, a button basher, getting the labels off. And you can see actually when I start to remove those labels, the actual colour that is present underneath. So we can use that as a benchmark for how this is going. Looks like the Dragon 32 label is going to come off pretty easily too, but I still have this glue and paper residue to get rid of, and I'm going to use a little bit of WD-40 to help me get rid of that. This is in a little kind of indent in the plastic enclosure here, so I can put some WD-40 in there and leave that to sit, and we'll just kind of dribble a little bit on here, hopefully to get rid of the adhesive on that. So while our Dragon is sitting there waiting for the WD-40 to soften the adhesive, we'll turn our attention now to the TRS-80 colour. These computers are very similar in their architecture, by the way. This is quite yellowed. Most of the yellowing seems to be on the top half of the enclosure, and you can see here the difference between the interior and exterior of the enclosure colours. This part is all yellowed and it's kind of marbled too, so I'm not overly worried about making things worse if this doesn't go to plan. The lower enclosure isn't too bad. There's some discoloration on it, but it's not nearly as bad as the top. So I think I'm probably going to leave that as it is, but I might take off the keys here that are supposed to be white and see if we can do anything with those, because those really have yellowed. The rest of them, you know, this really isn't a massive restoration job. It's just an experiment to see how it goes. So probably the rest of them I'll leave, and hopefully we'll get some improvement over how it looks at the moment. So I've laid out all the pieces that we have to be retro-brighted, and I should clarify, I have before commented on my video about the use of the word retro-bright. It's really just bleaching. I use a peroxide solution to bleach the plastics and then put them in some daylight to maybe activate that somehow with ultraviolet light. Who knows, it seems to work. I know you can use heat, you can use OxyClean, you can use different approaches, but the one I'm going to try today is saran wrap or cling film and a hair bleach. And so we enter another voiceover section, not for editorial effect, but because I forgot to turn the microphone on while I was filming the cleaning. But what we have here is a bowl of water and washing up liquid, and I'm scrubbing the enclosure with a nail brush. When I think I've scrubbed as much of the dirt away as I can, I dry it off with a towel. The end result is pretty good, but there's still a few marks and scuffs on there that I remove with a magic eraser. The Dragon 32 gets a very similar procedure, but by the time I get to the upper enclosure, I've turned my microphone back on. And so here's our very grubby upper enclosure, and I'm just going to try and clean the rest of this label residue off, at least as much of it as I can. So the label came away pretty well, all the adhesives have gone, perhaps a little bit aggressive to use that kind of spudger to clean away the label adhesive there, but you know, it'll give us a good reference point when we come to look at the difference between what we're retro-brighting and what has not been exposed to UV in the life of the computer. So I clean everything up using the soapy water, and I use the magic eraser on the top enclosure only, as I don't want to remove the print on the keycaps. And this is the first part that I'm going to try the bleaching, or if you like, retro-brighting process on the top of the Dragon 32. What I'm using is a True Zone 12% 40 volume cream peroxide. Other peroxides are available. This was just the one that I happened to find on Amazon at the time I was looking for peroxide. I've used it before, so we're going to give it a shake, and we're just going to brush that onto the top of the Dragon 32. So I liberally apply the peroxide gel to the plastic enclosure, and then I gently pull across the cling film in order to get a seal but not to squeeze any of the peroxide away from the surface of the plastics. I repeat the process on the other large plastic parts, and the keycaps I just put in the plastic container and cover them in peroxide. And so now all we need to do is wait for daybreak on the shortest day of the year. And with everything placed outside, we can sit back and relax. So it's about 11 AM now, and I don't feel our experiment is going particularly well. I don't see any evidence of significant lightening of the discoloured areas of the plastics, and they've been out now for over 2 hours. So it's approaching 1 o'clock in the afternoon now, and I do think we've seen a little bit of lightning, but it's very slow and very modest, and the plastics are still quite yellowed. Probably maybe a couple of hours to go before we lose the light. Well, as you can see, it's most definitely dark now, so let's get our retro-brighted samples inside and we'll see how it did. So here is our Dragon. It's obviously still a little bit yellowed, but generally I think we did pretty well. This is a fairly yellowish kind of computer anyway, and if you look at the difference between the outer enclosure where we retro-brighted and the colour of the internal, which was never exposed to UV, you see the difference actually isn't that significant. And when you look at where the label was, again, you know, it's kind of evident a little bit, but it's not that significant. So I think this was definitely worth doing. Much cleaner, much nicer, much brighter than it was before, consistent in colour. I could probably put it out for another day and lighten it a little bit more, but I don't think I'm going to risk it. I think this patina is appropriate and age appropriate to the Dragon. Probably a lot of them look like this after just a year or so anyway. So I think we're going to call this one done. So we'll do a quick before and after, and then we'll take a look at some marketing material from around the time the Dragon 32 was on sale. So I've seen quite a few images of these computers, and in some of them they're quite pale, in others they're quite yellow. I'm going to assume that mine was one of the yellow ones. So what about our TRS-80 colour? Well, you know, it's definitely improved over where it was, but it's not perfect. There are still swirls of the yellowing on the top enclosure here. You can see patches of yellow around the front and still some yellowing on the keyboard rest. But it started out from a much worse place than the Dragon. It's a lighter colour anyway, and there was more discoloration on it. So I don't think we did too bad. So in order to get the TRS-80 more or less where I wanted it, I did repeat the process again. I reapplied the peroxide gel, I put it out for another 2 days, and this is what we ended up with. I'll show the before and after now. So that just about wraps it up for our winter solstice retro-brighting experiment today. Obviously the Dragon 32 has a more yellow tone, but I think that's, looking at the inside, probably closer to the original colour, and this of course only had 1 day out in the grey, murky, short daylight that we had. The TRS-80 colour came back quite nicely. There's a little bit of discoloration on there, but again, quite close to the original colour, and I'm very pleased with the progress that that made, although it took a couple of days longer. The keys look, I think, like they would have done more or less when they were new. So this, to me, has been a worthwhile experiment. So I suppose it just goes to show that although this might not be the best technique for retro-brighting in December in the UK, it's still a technique that works. If you'd like to know what happened to the other parts of these computers, then keep an eye on the channel because there'll be more videos about these two machines coming soon. I hope that you've enjoyed the video today and that if you have, you'll consider hitting subscribe. But until next time, I'd just like to thank you so much for watching Retro Tech Repair. Oops. And back. And off we come with the lid.